All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our weekly show, the South Star Classroom. What are we up to now? It's like episode 65 or 64 or something crazy like that.
I mean, it's insane. We've been doing
Yeah, it
so many
is.
episodes, we can't even keep count, ladies and gentlemen,
We
bringing
don't
you
even
only
know.
the freshest of content.
Yeah, it's a big number, somewhere between.
We lose you? We lost David.
I can't hear.
Oh, I think Charles
joined us.
Oh, damn. Dr.
Charles,
Charles,
but
I
hurricanes.
I mean, my
My
team is on my way here to Florida. And they're not here yet. So handle that. But y'all have to help me.
So David's talking and we can't hear him. And you're on echo. We can't hear David at all. Technical difficulties.
Of course.
I think David is going off, and I don't think anyone can hear this.
Oh, it's your side that has. It's you or David. I think David has something.
Okay. Let me see what's going on here.
Say something.
Okay. I mean, mine's legit now. Yeah.
It was David. Yeah, it was David. So I'm going to stay on until David can get situated and get back. So here's the thing, right? Let me explain what's happening. So
what's happening?
Had a team. We set up a team retreat in Miami a while ago before Hurricane Ian came. So Hurricane Ian comes, but it misses Miami, which is great. But you still got to fly through stuff. So my team was supposed to be here earlier, and then I was going to be able to do the show and all that. But somebody's here. Somebody got here. Somebody's not here yet. So I need to go handle that and make sure they're taken care of. The other thing, though, that's really cool that I'll share as David gets his sound right is I got them surprise tickets to go see for VIP access with Mike Tyson tonight. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a nice little surprise, but one of them's not here. So as you could see, it's kind of chaos here. But Miami is beautiful. Miami was not hurt by the hurricane, not the part that I'm in, I guess. And then and later on at the Fontainebleau, I'll be seeing. Hopefully, you'll get some pictures with me and Mike Tyson. That'll be really cool.
That's incredible. Please do take photos with the champ. I love the champ. If I was him, I'd call him the champ. I think many people would say that Muhammad Ali is the greatest of all time. And I think there would be a
Mike
certain
Tyson
agreement with that. For me,
right. I love
Mike Tyson is absolutely the very best of all time. I grew up with Iron Mike. I think he's number one. And like his stand-up routine, or I don't want to call it stand-up, his shows that he did with Spike Lee are unbelievable. And then I'm watching his new show on Hulu right now.
Well, he hates that. So just FYI, he hates that show.
Oh,
so
they did. I thought he was involved.
No, they didn't do it with him. So he did a one-man show a while ago, and they just took the one-man show and built the show off of it. But he was building a different show with Jamie Foxx playing him, or a movie. He was doing something else with Jamie Foxx. So I think he gave some rights away or something. Something happened to where Hulu can do it. But I'm sure he's going to talk about it tonight in his event tonight. So
okay,
I'm about to get my facts straight, head over there, and try to make and salvage the rest of this evening. But yeah, David, are you good? Are you with us?
Yeah.
I don't want to leave.
How are you?
You're good, David. We still can't hear you. Yes,
we can hear. I just heard him.
Okay.
All right, I'm back. Thank you. It's Mike Tyson. What kind of performance is this?
So he's having like a talk. He was doing one-man shows and stuff. This is like a sit down with him and a childhood friend at the Fontainebleau, and then he had like some VIP tickets available and all that stuff. So the surprise I wanted my team. We're doing our team building. you know, hopefully we
Yep.
were, you know, I was gonna be able to take everybody there, but one person is not in. So
Okay. Yeah, I love the.
yeah.
I mean, I love Mike Tyson as a boxer, but I think what he's done with his life post boxing is kind of my sweet spot for him. I'm a regular listener of his podcast, Hot Boxing. It's a great podcast. But yeah, he's just a very interesting, very down to earth, genuine human being, and that didn't come across. You know, when he was trying to rip people's heads off, he was a different person, and now he's you know, he's the Mike Tyson of 2022. So I hope you enjoy it. Good for you.
Yeah, I'm
That's
gonna sign
badass,
off.
man.
I really want to do this. I really want to do this topic. I know my service is bad. I'm in through my phone. I'm tethering, but I'm gonna go handle and take care. I'm gonna run my company. I
Okay.
need to go do that and be an actual CEO. But man, I love y'all. I really wish I could be part of this conversation, but I don't want to slow the show down. So let me get out the way, and I'll try to get y'all some pictures and drop it in our group chat.
Okay.
Sounds
Badass,
good.
man. Thank you.
Enjoy. All right. Now we got
So,
the audio
David.
worked out. Yes, sir.
Very good. I think you were going off and getting everything introduced and doing your thing. And I don't think we were on the audio. So
Yeah.
I may ask you to just kind of do a quick repeat for our audience about what was
Sure.
going on.
No problem. I mean, actually, what I was doing is we're just kind of doing a check-in, and doing the regular kind of like, you know, before the show business. So, did you check in yet? Have you checked in? You've been moving around a lot, Omar. So, what's been going on in your world?
I've not checked in yet. And I hope
Yeah.
you do your check-in over again because I want to hear what's going on. What's going on in my world? So it is late September and school is getting stabilized. And we're trying to get restabilized post COVID, and still like the insane difficulties that we're facing with students and learning loss and everything else. But I feel like this is the first year where things are like really well stabilized, and we grew exponentially. I think I mentioned on the show, like from 30 teachers to 75 to like,
Incredible.
you know, we're almost at 100 employees now, which is insane because we started our organization with like 5. And now we're
Wow.
almost at 100, which is crazy. So we've stabilized the things, and I have been able to escape and visit friends in different parts of the country. Denver, I'm in DC right now, because I have the luxury of checking in on things vis-a-vis Zoom and doing a ton of front loading. So things are good, man. And I'm hanging out with my friends, and it's wonderful. So
Awesome.
it's a really great little reprieve that's much needed.
Great. Good for you. Good for you. Maybe
What's up with you, man?
a future show, future topic, we'll go into the, you know, whatever you want to call it, live work balance.
Yes,
of
indeed.
of the school leader, of the executive director, because so many of us tend to work ourselves into the ground until we're like no good to do any more work.
Yep.
And so it's important to notice when you you know, are ready for a break, and that you have things set up in a way that you can kind of step back, still complete your work, but just do it in kind of a less intensive manner. People are kind of afraid to do that, and it's like, look, the sun still came up, the moon came up. You
It's
know,
all right. It's
kids
all
are in
right.
school, they're learning. Yeah, and we hired 35 teachers, you know, which is insane, or whatever the number was. Okay. So yeah, in general, it's been a good week. There's a lot happening. We're going to talk about one thing today, but there are a number of things happening. You know, education is just it's a much bigger it makes much bigger headlines now than it used to, and people are talking about all facets of education, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, and so I think it's been interesting just reading many of the headlines. We'll get into the subject here for today's show in a minute. But you know, the last couple of days have also, I think Charles mentioned it, he's in Miami now. My brother, they have a home in Florida, and I think I sent some pictures over via our private chat. He lives in a town very close to Fort Myer. It's called Punta Gorda, and they got a direct hit, you know, with this whatever Category 5 Hurricane Ian, and he obviously evacuated to the other side of Florida. He's like literally staying on the other side of this little canal, he can see Mar-a-Lago. He's in Palm Beach. I was like,
Okay, wow.
Okay. You're gonna go back. So I was like, you should have told me ahead of time. We could have done something. But yeah, I mean, his just watching, watching, marveling at the power of nature and thinking about, climate change and these big storms and like where we build houses and places where we maybe shouldn't be building them. And, it's just really gotten me thinking about a lot of different things. But also in terms of the news coverage, it's like the first place that Ian made landfall was not Florida, it was Cuba. And
okay.
And people just don't talk about that. It went right
Yeah,
across
exactly.
the western side of Cuba, Pinar del Rio, and then went back into the Gulf, and then formed again, and then it hit Florida, and it left, and now it's hitting like Charleston and other places. Man, superstorm. So that's been kind of taking up a couple days, just checking in on family, making sure that he's okay. Yeah, I think that's it. Are you ready to jump into today's topic?
He is okay, right?
He's fine. Yeah, he's fine. His house was damaged. They lost like a structure. It's like a big patio structure over their pool. Got ripped off. Some of the roof tiles. He has a boat. The boat's lifted on a little pier. Fortunately, the boat is still there. But the general area, man, was just devastated. And so also thinking about, like, I mean, there's schools there that got wiped out, and it's like, it's a big thing. And at the end of the day, and that's a very interesting area of Florida too. It's like, I think nearby Tucker Carlson has a home, and like, these kinds of people, right? It's MAGA land.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, when all is said and done and the rebuilding campaigns begin, who's going to be rebuilding that part of Florida? It's going to be
right,
brown
exactly.
people.
Just like New Orleans.
Just like New Orleans, exactly. So, exactly. So we'll follow that. But yeah, I wanted to jump into again, a lot of stuff happening this week in the news around education. But we would, we want to bring front and center to have a discussion, and also for our listeners to engage in a discussion around some of the violence that we've been seeing across, both in the East Coast and the West Coast in our schools. It's not necessarily a straightforward conversation that we're going to have today around, like school shooters, but shootings that happen in school. So there's, violence at the end of the day is violence, and it creates, trauma for all that are involved and all that have to experience it. What we're going to talk about today is sort of, violence that exists in the community, and then that spills over onto the campuses, our sanctuaries, our schools, where people are sometimes, unfortunately, are hurt, shot, sometimes they're killed, or sometimes those threats are made. This is not a new issue. It's been happening for decades. You probably have your stories. I have my stories. We can get into some of that. But there have been I think within the last 2 weeks, shooting that happened outside of a school in Philadelphia, and then a couple of days ago, a shooting that happened outside and also inside of a school in Oakland, California. And people were hurt, and those communities are traumatized. I just can't imagine a young person having to go back to a school after a shooting has happened in their school, and the sense of safety that is may not have been so strong in the beginning, but like, just imagine how unsafe it could feel to have to go back into that setting and just put all your guard down and just engage in the work of school. It's a tough time, and it's a really hard thing to see, both for the adults that are involved, but also the children. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. That's the general story. I don't know if you have anything to add on that. And then we'll jump in.
I mean, I'm ready to dive into this story. I got all kinds of angles and things that I want to discuss, and even semi-personal things, not so much about shootings, but the aftermath of what we're doing in order to try to prevent this, and it may not be what our audience thinks it is.
Yeah. I mean, so you just reminded me of a piece that I picked up. This thing that happened in Oakland happened at a campus that is home to, I think, like 3 different schools. It's a charter school. It's a newcomer high school that's run by the district, and also it's the site where the district's online school is run out of, right?
Okay.
And so kids are coming in for check-ins, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
You have a high percentage of immigrant students, and then you have this charter school. So it's kind of a mix. This incident, I believe, happened at the, in and around one of the district schools, and there was some kind of altercation that happened outside. Weapons were pulled, people were shot outside, and then people went into the school. They breached into the actual physical building and continued to shoot, and
Jesus.
were able to get away. I think 6 people were shot, including a security guard that was employed by the charter school.
Oh my God.
So it sounds like the charter school security guard may have responded first,
right?
And he, he was injured, and it's still an unsolved crime. These kinds of crimes in Oakland, they just don't get solved quickly because people are hesitant to talk, for their own reasons.
Yes.
I wouldn't say for good reasons, but for their own reasons. And so, so that happened there, and then there was a press conference that happened mainly with elected leaders and the police chief and somebody from the school district. They all have their talking points. It was interesting. They point directly to the mayor of Oakland pointed directly towards the federal government and gun laws, and like that's all she talked about. And I was like, you can advocate for those things.
Yes.
We're talking about
We're
talking about communities in your city that you run. We're talking about schools in your city that are run by the school district. I mean, gun laws are one thing, but I mean, in my opinion, totally absolving herself of any responsibility for what's for the conditions that exist in the city of Oakland, California.
Yes.
And so you're the angle piece that you brought up kind of reminded me of that. We can go back to that, but yeah, I'd love to have you jump in and just share your thoughts, and let's get into it.
So, we have 2 articles that we're happy to share with the audience. Mm-hmm. One was a situation that happened in Oakland, and the other situation was the one that happened in Philadelphia. So if folks aren't totally aware of what happened in Philadelphia, unfortunately, it was essentially like kind of a drive-by, stop-by shooting, which is insane. It was a group of 5 young men who got out of a SUV in front of a high school. I'll get the exact name of that high school in a second. And this is outside in Philly, and ultimately just opened fire on a group of students, apparently on the football team. Somehow or another, this was all related to football.
Yep.
Which is also a bit insane. So this is Roxborough High School in Philadelphia. And not only did they open fire on these students, and we were talking about like 14 and 15-year-old kids, just insane to me. The perpetrators, the folks who opened fire, decided to get out of the car and just continue firing on a student that is already down to the point where they ran out of bullets. And they are trying desperately to to investigate the scenario, figure out what's happened. But much like Oakland, sadly, the scenario is just becoming political, people kind of not accepting full responsibility for what could have happened and how they could have prevented the scenario. And then who knows where they are in terms of the investigation, you know?
Yep.
And, you know, is, you know, we're talking about two sides arguing about the NRA and gun laws, and Governor Wolf saying like, yes, this is unacceptable. But once again, talking about background checks and gun sales and things that are more of a federal perspective than it was from a local perspective. And really from a perspective of like, what is it that the schools can be doing in order to try to prevent this? And my quick wrap or turn or shift, or, you know, if you want to call it the M. Night Shyamalama Ding Dong twist on this, is that I think that most people, when they think about gun violence, and it's like, it's gotten to the point where it's so desensitized, it's gotten to the point where like South Park is like making fun of not the gun violence. So I hope people understand this, the not just the occurrence, the frequent occurrence of this, but the desensitization of Americans to gun violence and how prevalent it is, that it's just like almost an everyday affair. And it's just like, oh yeah, like, yo, there was another shooting. Yeah, of course. Like the South Park cartoons, they're literally like walking the halls and like they're in full-blown gunfights. And they're walking around with like AKs, and you know, it's just another day at South Park as they're trying to get from like second period to third period. And Mr. Mackey's out there, he's like, oh, we got another shooting, everybody get the F down, okay? And again, it's not to make fun of the violence, it is to make a statement that it has become so prevalent in our country that has become extraordinarily desensitized, and desensitized to the point where people are sadly just accepting that this is a way of life instead of saying, wow, there's something that we can do about this. And most people's perspective, David, I think is about like old school criminology, like security officers, police officers, metal detectors, backpack checks. And time again, and we'll get into a further discussion about this, we're realizing that none of those deterrents actually work. So I think we're going to get into a discussion about what does work and what are things that can happen inside of schools that can start preventing this violence, as opposed to just allowing it to spread in infantry.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I do think there is some low-hanging fruit in that list that you just shared of things that you know, people you know, often bring to the table that may be more like traditional thinking around, you know, how we can prevent violence. So I mean, I think there is definitely some value there, but I mean, jumping to I think where we're going to go is I spent about 25 years working in schools in Deep East Oakland, right? 12 of those years I spent at the high school, Oakland Unity High School. This is in Deep East Oakland. You know, the 90s, early 2000s were a very violent time there. And then it improved, and now it's kind of taken a nosedive. So, you know, I've actually taught in schools that were, you know, where we dealt with these issues daily. Gang issues, right? Latino gangs, for sure, all the time. Turf wars, you know, kids crossing different neighborhoods. And then, you know, the repercussions from, let's say, you know, street transactions like drug dealing and other financial transactions that went sour, right? And how that shows up. And this is all happening at a time where social media is you know, kids are hopping on social media like in the early 2000s, right? Snapchat was invented, you know, and Facebook was a thing. MySpace, and Facebook, where a lot of you could actually like track, you know, a lot of
Right.
this
Yes.
stuff.
Here we go.
It originated online, and we would pay attention to that stuff, right? Or something would happen, and a kid would print out a page and say, hey, something's going to go down after school, and slide us anonymously, you know, some information. And so we had this communication. But point being is, we ran a school. I was principal of that school for 10 years. And there was never one day, Omar, where I felt unsafe on campus in a neighborhood that was very unsafe. And people would come and visit our school frequently, and they would say, what's going on here? You know, these who are these kids? And I'm like, these are the kids that live in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I even had like I would have never hired somebody like this, but we would have substitutes come in and say like, oh, these aren't, you know, this is like a white woman in her 30s that went to Yale, and she's like, well, these aren't real East Oakland kids. I'm like, are you effing kidding me? I'm like, this is what happens when you put kids, when you provide a space for children that come from, you know, neighborhoods that have been traumatized over the years, into a safe, healing, supportive school environment, where they start to develop a sense of purpose, right? A sense of purpose around their lives, right? And it's this whole, you know, I forget what where it's written in the Bible, but the idle hands, right? Idle hands. Our kids didn't have idle hands. They were extremely busy. And when they got stuck, when they hit a roadblock, when they were challenged with a social issue or a home issue or an academic issue, we were there to help them, right? And so their time was taken, their purpose was taken. They played sports, they did after school activities, and as a result, we were able to build a community within a larger community that was heavily broken, that was safe. We could hear gunshots going off all the time. We could, you know, the police chopper, the ghetto bird, was constantly hovering. But what we, you know, developed, and it's not rocket science. It's hard work, and you're focused on supporting children. You're focused on their needs. You don't get caught up in any of the politics, or, you know, you hire people that believe that all children matter, all children can succeed, all children can achieve. It changes the dynamic of, you know, one student's life, many students, that spreads out, and, you know, it has implications outside of the school, right? Those kids are not looking to get into trouble, because they're like in the 10th grade, and I got to get to the 11th grade, because then I got to get to the 12th grade, and then I'm going to go to UC Davis, or I'm going to go to Cal State Hayward, or San Francisco State. Because when I was a 9th grader, they put me on a bus, and they drove me to UC Santa Cruz to see other Black and brown, you know, kids like me from my neighborhood that are attending UC Santa Cruz. So I know that's a possibility for me.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm going to change my life, right? Wasn't always perfect, but essentially, like, that's the purpose of school. That should be the purpose of school. And so I think there's the role that schools can play in and around violence prevention. It's not anti-gang activities. It's not, you know, all these other things that we're trying to invest in. It's good, proper, engaging, safe schooling. That's it. And if you can do that, you know, at small schools, or at a scale in a district, in a high poverty area like Oakland, East Oakland, West Oakland, that's your contribution to changing the climate in the community. The community part doesn't come first. The schools are responsible for the 8 to 10 hours at school the kids are in school. That's it, right? And so when I hear politicians talk about, you know, federal gun laws, immediately I'm like, so then what is your role here, right? You're not taking any responsibility for the violence in the community. So that's my soapbox.
I mean, I'm with you, man. And I want to dig a little deeper, and I want to ask a few questions, because when you said that's it, I think that is, I want to just say like it, towards this very fun tangent. And for our audience, because I think this means something deep to me and something that I like would love to write a book on, that I would love to expand upon, that I'd love the South Star Classroom to do a ton of consulting on, is that it seems so easy to say that's it because the premise is simple, but the insane difficulty of creating a culture that is contrary to what people think a school culture is and could be is the quintessential ingredient for creating a solution. So that's a very fancy way of saying David was extraordinarily, and I'm making this assumption, but it's probably a very easy assumption to make. You were probably extraordinarily careful and strategic about your intent to create a culture at that school. And I'd love to ask you, because there's probably 100 different things, because what we would do at EPLA, there's 100 different things. And like, that may be another book that I write, like the 100 things, because everyone's like, what is so different? And it's like, you're looking for that silver bullet. And I'm like, yo, it's 100 different things. And those 100 things have like 12 different subsets of things that we're doing for that one thing that is going to change the culture and change the academics. So to give our audience just a little bit of context and kind of break it down and make it simple, tell me 3 big things. You named one. You're taking your high school freshmen to colleges so they can see themselves in Black and brown kids at the collegiate level and speaking with them, which is extraordinarily powerful, not that difficult to proposition, and yet so radically like underdone. Like, my vocabulary is slipping today. It's just, it's radical that such a simple solution isn't actually accomplished in mass across schools in the United States. So if that's one, maybe 2 or 3 other things that you did at Oakland Unity that you may have done at the Montessori school that was very purpose driven in the creation of culture that you think had a dramatic impact on reducing violence.
So I think, well, I think the overarching is that you have to show children that you care, right? And not just that you as a leader of a school or an organization, but every single person. So getting to like your hiring, your adult culture, you know, making sure that when you are hiring, you know, it's a kind of a hard thing to hire for, because you can ask people questions in interviews and they can say the right thing, but then their actions once they start to work tell you something that's very different, right? So I think having your finger on the pulse around the adults that work in your organization is number one, and that everybody's clear on mission and on vision, right? Everybody's focused, rowing in the same direction. That's number one. Nobody's there just for a job, right? And I don't care what your background is. You can be white from Oklahoma. You can be African American from Louisiana. You can be, you know, Latino from LA. You know, everybody can show up to the table, you know, unified in their belief that the children in that school or school system can achieve and can succeed, right? Potential. Number one. I think number two is maybe a little more of the getting into the weeds a little bit, but what we tend, so big picture, when young people begin to feel disenfranchised from school, right? They start to step away from engagement in school, step away from those relationships, step away from their vision of themselves as a student. That's where we start to see poor decision making kind of step in, right? Students turning to gangs, turning to drugs, turning to crime, or just you know, turning to nothing, right? Just kind of dropping out, not just of school but of society, and we see that a lot with young people. And so the flip side of that, I think, is number two is, and this is a technical thing, but making sure that your instructional program, you know, down to the specific way that you approach assignments and that you grade and that you assess is making sure that students are getting work and there's an expectation around the completion of that work that is at or just slightly above their level, right? Work that is below grade level sends a message to children that their learning is not important. Work that is given to them, that is completed, that is where they're not given feedback, sends a message to them that schoolwork and ultimately school is not important.
Yeah, straight up, it ain't important.
And
it's not important.
Work that is given to students that is too challenging without the support to help them get there, sends a message that like school is not for me, right?
Correct.
And so I think, you know,
really
getting
well
down to that
broken
level
down.
of like instruction and making sure that like teachers are providing that personalization for every single child, right?
Really well said.
Because that's where kids start to drop off. And then I think the third thing I would add is you know, things like this mindset advisory, right? Having an advisory program. Every child deserves a quarterback on campus, right? You're going to have a couple of teachers in elementary, in middle and high, you start to go to like 6 teachers. That's a lot of adults, right? There has to be a system, especially when we get into the older grades, where children have one quarterback. Mr. Yanar, you're my kid's advisor. My kid has 6 classes. You might not teach them any of the academic stuff, but you're their advisor and you're the go-to person. And you're going to be there to help, you know, you're that safety net. So creating that infrastructure of safety net for children so they just don't literally, we say this all the time, fall through the cracks, because they do. And then the last thing, I think you asked me for 2, but you're going to get 4, is once all of those things are set up and organized, is having clear systems of supervision around campus. You mentioned this earlier, but I do think it doesn't have to be a security guard, but like you run a school, there should be adults. You know, if school starts at 8, you need to have adults in front of the school by 7:30.
Yeah.
And until school starts. And then you have a safe process for adults to enter the building after that. You have a camera, you have a guard or a staff that is there, so people can't, you know, freely walk in and out of your school, right? That's a basic safety measure, especially working in these kinds of communities. You have to have a very clear a perimeter around the school, you know, that can't be breached. It sounds like military, but this is what I'm saying, man. And then after school too, you know, you have adults that are outside monitoring activities. The power of having a school staff, you know, just around will generally wipe out 80% of any kind of mischief that's going to happen, because kids see that Mr. Yanar's over there. So I'm not going to like do whatever I'm going to do. It also sends a message to the community that if you want to come up and, you know, commit crimes, you know, bring crime from the community into the school, there are going to be adults there that are going to notice you. And they have a system where they can call for backup quickly. It doesn't have to be a resource officer or a security guard. It can be an administrator. But just having that visibility that's out in front of the sanctuary that a school is. I think those are things that, you know, people, that's low-hanging fruit. That's scheduling. That's making sure that people are at their posts, making sure people know what to look out for, you know, just so learning can happen within the school.
So I love it, because I think we just gave a mini lesson on school culture. And I kind of blew up a little bit. This is maybe a little TMI recently, because I spent a full year really kind of getting the culture at our new campus down packed and building this thing up. And, you know, recently, like I saw it slipping and I'm like,
yeah,
what are you guys doing? And where's the urgency behind this? And do you think that I'm joking around about such things? Mm-hmm. And the message you're sending isn't just personal to me, saying, we know better than you do, Mr. Yanar, about school culture, which that's like someone telling you, David, who's been a teacher for 2 years, sorry, Mr. Castillo, I think I know a little bit more about school culture than you, and you being like, given what information? I ran the #1 school in Oakland for 12 years, started a brand new school. I was executive director of the school, like studied it for, 30 years, definitively knowledgeable about culture. And it's that important that I had to be so emphatic to be like, listen, like you're going to present to me the entire rollout of everything that I did last year in the next 2 weeks to me. And I want to see it systemically rolled out, because every day that you are losing the opportunity to build this culture is every day that you are creating not only a problem for yourself, but back to the show, you're breeding a ground for violence. So I think you nailed it, but I want to punch on a couple of things that you discussed. Listen, can we prevent violence always? Sadly, no. Is Uvalde a very radical example of something that I never would have suspected ever happening? Some 18-year-old kid going to an elementary school. That is so far out of my comprehension, out of my brainwaves, that could ever happen, that it's still difficult for me to process. Given those horrific examples, the overwhelming amount of violence, sadly, ladies and gentlemen, that happens at school are from students within that school. That's where the majority of this violence comes from. It's not from an outside entity or an outside person. I think the situation in Philadelphia was a rivalry, and that is horrific. And I think I'm going to speak very clearly about what I think a couple of the systems could have been there that may have assisted. But the overwhelming majority of violence, ladies and gentlemen, spawns from a student that goes to that school, and then they're lashing out against that school. And I think that one of the greatest components of that violence, and you talked about it in your third point, was a disenfranchisement, which simply put, when a kid feels like no one's looking out for me, no one cares, no one like cares whether I'm alive or dead. No one cares if I'm doing good or not. No one's talking to me about how I am. That insane level of loneliness and that same level of disenfranchisement can drive students to do insane things. And oftentimes, sadly, like with extraordinary violence. And just asking the question, does someone care about me, is such a huge start for our audience to think about. Is there someone at your children's school? Is there someone at the school that you work at? Are you a teacher, administrator, somebody? Can you say definitively, yes, someone at this school knows me and cares about me? And the system around that I'm really glad you brought up was essentially what you call the quarterback system, which is the advisory system, which is super smart. So every single one of our middle schoolers has an advisory teacher, and that is like the one-stop shop. It's also such a brilliant idea. I don't know why every school doesn't do this, because like you go to middle school, your high school, and I talk to my parents about this all the time, and it's such an enormous selling point for a school that I'm like, listen, like something happens with your kid, who are you going to call? And like, yeah, I know like I'm making a Ghostbusters reference, but like, who are you going to call? Like, I went to Franklin High School in El Paso, 4,000 students in that school. Like, something's up with me. Who are you going to call? You're going to call the assistant principal? They don't know me. You're going to call the principal? They have no idea who I am. You're going to call the guidance counselor? The same one that told me, Omar, I think you should, start a community college and then work yourself up from there. And I'm like, that dude? Oh, man. like, what's that dude going to offer you other than some really shitty advice? So then parents get struck, and it's that moment that it's like this insane, it's not an aha moment that I have with them. It's an epiphany moment. It's a realization that they're like, oh my God, you're right. Because at the elementary school, the teacher, it was one teacher and they taught most of the subjects, a homeroom teacher. It's a brilliant idea. But then that homeroom teacher gets lost in the middle school and the high school phase. And that is,
that's when young people need it the most, right?
Correct.
When they go from having one teacher or two teachers to having 4, then 5, and then ultimately as many as like 7, right?
That's exactly right.
And when we talk about advisory, like there's a fundamental difference between school networks that build from the advisory out versus adding the advisory as an add-on, where it's not given resources, it's not it just doesn't have the same value, and that tends to look like a homework club, right? It's not really advisory. But when an advisory system can be set up where it's just like when I was teaching, and then when I stayed in my first couple of years of being a principal, I still held an advisory class, and those were not my children, but they were my kids. They were my children, right? And it's like that mindset of like, these are my kids. I'm gonna harbor them. I'm gonna provide a safe space. I'm gonna hold them accountable. I'm going to engage with them, and I'm going to engage with their families. And I mean, that the power of those kinds of relationships, right, are the foundation for school culture and for building great schools. And then from there, you start to see that spill over. You can see that spill over in the community, in the draw to your school. It's I'm not going to say it's magic. It's not magic. But it's something that can be very powerful and very special for young people and for children. And it can keep many young people that are surrounded by violence to not choose violence in any number of scenarios.
And look, it's practical magic. And I want to sink even deeper into this one, because I think this is such a huge component that people underestimate. It's not rocket science, ladies and gentlemen, so it's not that complicated. However, it's not that simple. And I think the simple solution is like, oh, give these kids an advisory teacher, and then it becomes homework club. And it's like, no.
Yeah, yep.
What happens in these advisories is that they see this teacher every single day, preferably in the morning and the afternoon. That this teacher, this is, I think, where the rubber hits the road. It's the exact attitude that David just talked about. These teachers feel an incredible sense of responsibility over these 25 students. Now think about that for a moment. Think about how logical this is. Instead of a teacher saying, I've got to worry about 150 kids. Instead of a teacher saying, I got to worry about 300 kids. Instead of a teacher being like, oh my God, I've got so many periods, so many kids, it's difficult to keep track. Like, yeah, care for all your kids, but it's these 25, these 30 kids that I'm going to do a deep dive with. I'm going to build relationships with. I'm going to check out their grades. I'm going to call their parents. I'm going to be the liaison between the parent and the child. We're going to structure our student-centered conferences around the advisory teacher. And building that rapport consistently, what we found is that when students leave the grade level, they continue to go back to that advisory teacher endlessly to share problems and difficulties and good news. And then what happens is that relationship becomes so important. This is what I stress with our teachers all the time. I was like, the magic is in building the relationship, because this child in middle school, their one intrinsic reward for doing good work is you. The fact that they are not going to disappoint you, they don't want to disappoint you, will drive an immense amount of work. But ladies and gentlemen, this is part of this major and like magical elixir of when children feel cared for, they feel that someone's looking out for them, that someone is looking at them. So kind of like you were discussing in terms of a ton of like, yo, listen, like you can run, but you can't hide. Like there's adults everywhere, and someone's looking out for you, and someone knows what you're up to. Children then question the decisions that they make because they don't want
to. People have expectations of them.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, and they know that people care about them, and they think about those things before doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, I think it's you're talking about the shift from I'm a teacher, I have 5 periods, however many kids, 120, 130 come through my class, and those are my kids. Versus I'm a teacher, I have X number of kids, I have an advisory, and
Exactly.
as a group of educators and support specialists and clerical staff and administration, you know what? Every single child on that campus is your child. It's the difference between these are my kids. I don't know that kid. I know this kid. They are all your kids. They are all our kids, right? It's that
Yes.
shift. That's when the grounds are ready to start building school culture. You can't do it if it's siloed and well, I teach art over here in the bungalows or whatever, you know, and like you know, and that I mean that's the shift. I'm telling you, man, I think I'm just reflecting on this right now. There are most of the students that I worked with, you know, going back now 20 years, Omar, I'm friends with them on Facebook and on Instagram. Like we talk, they call me, you know, 20 years later, and they're adults now, man. I'm like, damn, you're 35, you know, I'm like, what the hell, you know?
Oh.
It's crazy. You know, I'm like, you got more kids than I have. And you know, we have that relationship, but I will tell you, man, like many of those kids when they came to the high school, like they were ready. They're just like, we're ready. We went to a good middle school. We're prepared. And they were just like, they were more motivated, more focused, more mature than I ever was in high school. And these are kids that are like growing up in East Oakland, man. I was
Yeah.
like, you can't believe it. They didn't get distracted. And then the other
Yeah.
half were coming in and they were like traumatized and they were broken, man, and we had to rebuild these kids coming in, you know, with drug use issues, with gang issues, violence issues, mental health issues, and once they learned that they could trust us, right, you start to see these barriers kind of collapsing, right, and then you can start to do the work of re-engaging them with not just school, but like relationships with adults that could help them, right? Because when you don't have that connection at home or in school, you're going to find it in other places. And so, you know, all that to say, I think the you know, schools do play, they play a critical part in what we're seeing, you know, in like what happens in Philly schools and Oakland schools. Schools are not the end all be all. They're not going to solve, they're not designed to solve all of our problems. And we should stop saying that because that's too big of an ask for schools. But schools do play a very important role. And that's what they're responsible for. And that's what they should be held accountable for. I'm not saying like what's happened in Philly or in Oakland is a result of schools that, you know, weren't tracking kids and probably should have known that violence is going to happen. But I'll tell you what, man, I mean, we had situations where we knew, like we were tracking individual kids and like we knew, okay, Omar's going off the deep end. We can tell at school he's wearing different clothes. He's showing up late. His absences are you know, kind of, he's not showing up to school. And then, you know, and we show up to Omar's house. We show up to Omar's house unannounced and talk to him and his mom or his dad. And we have a conversation about it. And then we go into Omar's bedroom with the permission of his parents. And we go through his clothes and we remove all of his clothes that have the color blue because Omar is sliding into the gang life of the Sureño, right? And we're like straight like taking Omar's clothes away. We're like, if he wears these color clothes again, mom and dad, call us. We're like in his room doing that. And we did that for many kids, man, you know, many kids. And it's like, man, if these people show up to your house and they do this kind of unannounced intervention, what kind of message does that send to a young person? You know, probably mad initially, but like, damn.
Mad at first, but it's like, oh my God, like I've never had, and again, I love this because it's not to say that, oh, we do the same thing. It's that these strategies absolutely work. So they should be done across every school in the country but so few of us do it. In fact, this is a weird aside, but I was talking to, I'm privileged of being in DC. I went to this incredible program called Stanford in Washington. And I was talking to the director, who's got to be one of the smartest, most elegant, most brilliant women I've ever met in my entire life. Her name's Adrienne Jameson. And we were talking about schools, and she was very interested in like what we were doing. And my comment that was like, what you would find surprising, Adrienne, is that in 3 years, we took our school filled with low-income kids. The same, like, here's a statement that I want to really punch, is that you made that mention about that Yale teacher being like, hey, these aren't East Oakland kids. And I'm like, no.
Oh man, I've never wanted to punch somebody in the face so much.
It's like, you don't get it because you are part of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Your perception of thinking that kids from this area should behave this way is only perpetuating the problem, instead of realizing kids want to be this way if only given the proper environment. This is what they want to be. And this is the kind of place that they want to be, and it's our responsibility to create it. And I was telling Adrienne Jameson, I was like, you know what the most startling reality of running a very high performing, very high functioning public school, whether that's charter or not, is that our success, instead of being shouted from the mountaintops and spread across the land with incredibly good practices that David is doing in Oakland, that I'm doing in El Paso, that are very different places and very different communities. They work exceptionally well. This kind of information isn't being shared. It's being suppressed.
Yeah.
It's being suppressed.
And if you want to do more of it, if you want to grow your school or grow another school, you good luck, right?
Yeah.
And you sit back and scratch your head like, oh my God, this is that and so many times the people that are pushing back are people of color, are Black people, are Latino people. And you're like, okay, you really want to understand what white supremacy is?
Yeah.
That's what you're living, you know?
Yeah, you're doing it. You're doing it right now.
Literally what you're doing. I mean, we did the same thing at the high school in Oakland. We decided to open a middle school, to work with children younger, to have access to them, to begin to build that culture early, build that mindset earlier, and think about what we could do, you know? And incredible. It took us years to open the middle school with protests, and now it's like, you can't do it. You've never done it. I'm like, well, you ain't doing it now. Yeah, look, I mean, Oakland Unified has some of the worst middle schools in the state, you know, academically, and they pushed, and they wouldn't let us open. They wouldn't charter our school because they felt like it was a threat to the nearby district middle school that had been failing children for decades, because people worked there. It was people's jobs. It was like, quote unquote, part of the community, you know. And we kept fighting, and we got the school opened on appeal, and it's working deep in East Oakland now today. Damon Grant's the principal there, and they're working in it probably ground zero for East Oakland. When you hear East Oakland, this school is in ground zero. And they're doing amazing things for their young people, man, because that's what happens when people care, you know. And it's like, we can't, you know, the best violence prevention program, man, is not a violence prevention program.
Correct.
It's a good school.
Correct. And I wanted to break it down, like, ladies and gentlemen, like, we've had some excellent episodes, but I think that the Beard of Knowledge, David Castillo, broke down some of the most quintessential practical things that can be done at any school in this country that sadly isn't done, because to solve, I would say, the overwhelming majority of violence, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization that this is going to solve all problems, but to solve the overwhelming majority of violence is the intrinsic work of building a really wonderful community where kids feel not only seen, but protected by the adults within that building. And they feel sacred and honored to be in this space because that space means something to them, because the space and the people within it proved that that person means something to them. It's like that old adage about teach me that you care and I'll care about what you teach.
Yep.
And that component is so integral into making a difference in not just the culture, but the violence issue. And I talk about this ad nauseum as much as I can with friends and family and everybody else, because I'm like, listen, like metal detectors aren't going to solve your problem, and background checks are not going to solve the problem, and an SRO officer is not going to solve your problem. And
Nope.
this is just window dressing because it looks good instead of the deep rooted work it takes to intrinsically solve that issue from the roots. And that's what our kids deserve. And I think David just gave a master class on how to get that done. And listen, like, I'm going to be really selfish and say, like, I want to take this show on the road. Like, I want to write a book about this with David. I want us to co-author this book about school culture and just do an entire book just on the cultural component. Take that fucker on the road, have us sign books everywhere, have us do like talks with school districts, because until you get the culture completely fitted, ladies and gentlemen, the academic achievement that you hope to see, like William Conrad was like, hey man, like we need to teach these kids how to read. And I'm with you completely, except you're not going to be able to do that until you develop a culture where that child, for whatever reason, understands this is why it's important to read. And the first and most fundamental reason that they're going to want to start that endeavor is because they know someone cares about them and is holding them accountable to that. And not in a mean way, but in a very spirited way. So I'm all for it. I want to take this show on the road. And we're already at our hour, man. It's crazy.
Man.
We're over time. It's overtime.
Yeah.
Look at you, David.
That's crazy.
I hope this was recorded. Everyone needs to see this episode.
Yeah.
David Castillo, man.
We'll clip this up. Yeah, I didn't write any notes out. I've been thinking about this just from the, hurt obviously by the violence that we've seen happening in our schools, and feeling, like, I think the people have, they're talking about the wrong things, right? The conversation, the political conversation, the activist conversation, the social justice conversation, are not the right conversations. We're talking, those conversations are happening around something that we call schools. And so what we need to be talking about is school culture, what we talked about today. And that's the hard conversation, because then you really got to start peeling back the layers of the onion, and it's tough for people, man. But I think, that also the flip side of that is, like, that is actually the potential and the power that great schools hold, right? It's much more beyond a test score. You can change the trajectory of the life of one child, of 2 children, of 10 children, of 100, of 1,000, and you can start to impact the dynamic of a community, right? Away from violence, because they have a different orientation, right? They've been exposed to different possibilities. And so I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Omar. My tank is empty, man. I'm glad I needed to process this stuff, and I'm glad I did it in a way that we did it in a way that wasn't necessarily like, coming down too hard on the people that are working in schools that or maybe need to be doing it or thinking about it in a different way, but also, like, doing it in a way that uplifts some of the good work that's actually happening in great schools. And
1,000%.
A lot of those tend to be charter schools, especially in our big cities like Philly and Oakland, man. So
exactly.
And El Paso.
I'd say that my only final comments is take this show, wrap it up, and spread it everywhere, because y'all just got a master class on the basics and beginnings of school culture. And then listen, like, you and I need to write this book. Y'all need to hire us, and we will start creating these cultures inside of your schools because we can start solving this problem together. So
right.
I'm just honored to be part of this, man. Let's wrap this thing up. You want to wrap it up?
That's
for
it,
us?
man. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Just thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for your comments, and I appreciate your perspective, Omar. We'll definitely get some good clips out of this, and it was good having this dialogue. Just thinking about beyond this podcast, how we can work in partnership with schools, charter district school partners, to really be focusing on laser focused on things like school culture that really matter.
Excellent. So
All
from
right.
David Castillo, myself, Dr. Charles Cole, we are the South Star Classroom, ladies and gentlemen, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Roku. Coming soon to a podcast near you, and all of your favorite podcasts will be here next week. Have a great week, everybody, and a great weekend.
Peace.
Peace.